She was standing in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, holding a knife upside down and smiling at me with her mouth stretched too wide. And that was the moment everything ended. I screamed her name, and she didn't blink or speak, and the sound bounced off the walls like it didn't belong to us anymore. The knife slipped from her hand and hit the floor, and she kept smiling as if the noise was meant for someone else. That image stayed burned into me, and I need to explain how we ever reached that night. We were roommates by necessity, not friendship, sharing a narrow apartment with thin walls and a landlord who never fixed anything. She moved in after leaving a bad home situation, carrying only a suitcase and a calm politeness that felt practiced. The first weeks were normal, almost boring, with shared meals and late television noise. She worked nights at a storage facility, and I worked early mornings, so we barely crossed paths. Things changed after her third week, when she started leaving the bedroom door open at night. I noticed because the hallway light stayed on until morning, and it always bothered me. I asked her about it once, and she smiled and said she didn't like closed doors anymore. After that, I began hearing her move around while I was asleep. Slow footsteps stopping outside my room. Every time I checked, the hallway was empty and her room light was off. One morning, I found the bathroom mirror wiped clean, except for a single handprint at eye level. She said it must have been humidity, but the print was too clear. She stopped bringing food home and lived on coffee and crackers, losing weight fast. I caught her standing in front of the sink once, staring at her own mouth as if waiting for it to move. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was practicing being quiet. The apartment began to smell different, like old metal and damp concrete. I found scratches on the inside of her bedroom door, long marks running downward. She claimed they were there before she moved in, but I knew they were. At night, the sounds grew heavier, furniture shifting just enough to wake me. One evening, I came home early and found her sitting on the kitchen floor, smiling at the wall. She didn't respond when I spoke until I touched her shoulder, and then she flinched hard. She said she had been listening to the building breathe. I laughed it off, but she didn't. That night, I locked my door for the first time. The next morning, my lock was turned from the outside, and I knew because I always left it straight. I confronted her, and she said she never touched it, still smiling, still calm. Her smile stopped matching her eyes, which stayed flat and fixed. The building began making noises I couldn't explain, deep pops in the walls. She started standing too close when we spoke, her face inches from mine. I noticed she barely slept anymore, just sat in the dark. Once, I woke to find her sitting at the foot of my bed, hands folded, smiling without moving. I yelled, and she left without a word. From then on, she never spoke unless necessary, and even then it was short. Her silence grew heavier than sound, and the apartment felt smaller every day. I started sleeping with the light on, counting hours instead of resting. She began smiling more often, longer, like it was replacing something else. I realized she wasn't smiling at me, but at what she knew was coming. The night before everything broke, the power went out across the building, and the hallway filled with emergency lights. She stood in the doorway of her room, face lit red, smiling like she had been waiting for it. I asked if she was okay, and she nodded once without speaking. I heard her moving around all night, slow and deliberate, stopping outside my door repeatedly. In the morning, she didn't go to work, and her phone stayed untouched on the table. I tried calling her job for her, but the number was disconnected. The storage facility she claimed to work at didn't exist at the address she gave me. When I confronted her, she only smiled wider, lips stretching tight. I packed a bag that afternoon, planning to stay with a friend. As I reached the door, she stood between me and the exit without making a sound. She raised her hand and pointed toward the kitchen. I don't know why I followed, but I did. She opened a drawer slowly and took out the knife, placing it on the counter. She pushed it toward me, then shook her head and pulled it back. Her smile never left. She turned the knife upside down in her hand, gripping the blade like she didn't feel it. Blood ran down her wrist and onto the floor, and she watched it like it was fascinating. I yelled at her to stop, but she only tilted her head. She walked past me, leaving red drops across the tile. I ran to grab towels, but when I came back, the bleeding had stopped, and there was no wound. The blood on the floor was gone too, wiped clean. That's when the smell grew stronger, filling my nose. She went back to her room and closed the door for the first time since moving in. The scratching started immediately, louder and faster than before. I backed into my room and locked the door, pressing my body against it. The scratching moved from her door to the walls, then the ceiling. Something heavy fell in her room, shaking the floor. I screamed her name, but she didn't answer. The apartment went silent for a long time. Then I heard the kitchen cabinet open. I opened my door slowly and stepped into the hallway. She was standing there, holding the knife upside down, smiling at me in the dark kitchen. That was the moment I started this story with, because that was the moment she stopped being who she was. I begged her to put it down, but she didn't react. She dropped the knife suddenly and walked toward me, hands empty. She leaned close, her smile inches from my face, and stayed there, unmoving. I ran past her and locked myself in the bathroom. I heard her sit down outside the door. She stayed there all night, not moving, not speaking. When morning came, the apartment was quiet. I opened the door slowly. She was gone, and her room was empty, completely empty. No suitcase, no clothes, no scratches, nothing. The landlord later told me no one else was ever registered to that unit. I moved out that day, but something followed me anyway. Weeks later, I saw her again at a grocery store across town, standing in the frozen aisle. She was smiling at the glass door, not blinking. I said her name, and she turned her head slowly toward me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She lifted her hand and pointed at my reflection in the glass. I ran without buying anything. After that, mirrors became a problem. Every reflective surface showed me smiling when I was. My face would change for a second, lips stretching wider than I made them. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom and used the couch instead. One night, I woke up to find a note on the table written in her handwriting. It said nothing but my name, written over and over until the paper tore. I burned it, but the smell came back stronger. I started catching myself standing in rooms without knowing how I got there. Neighbors began avoiding me, looking at my mouth instead of my eyes. A cashier once asked me to stop smiling at her like that. I realized then that my face wasn't doing what I thought it was. I covered mirrors, windows, anything reflective. Still, I felt my mouth pulling upward when I wasn't paying attention. One night, I woke up standing in my kitchen, holding a knife upside down. I dropped it immediately and fell back against the counter. My hands were clean, no blood, no cuts. I understood then that the silence she carried had moved on. It wasn't about her anymore. I stopped speaking as much, afraid of what might come out. Words felt unnecessary, heavy. Smiling felt easier, automatic. People reacted to it, stepping back, growing quiet. I quit my job after a coworker asked why I smiled during bad news. The smell followed me everywhere now. I tried recording myself while I slept. In the morning, the recordings were gone, replaced by hours of empty audio. One file contained a single sound, slow breathing, that wasn't mine. I deleted everything. I avoided people completely. One evening, I caught my reflection clearly for the first time in weeks. My smile matched hers exactly from that night. My eyes looked flat and fixed. I practiced keeping my mouth still, pressing my lips together until they hurt. It didn't last. I understood why she stopped speaking. Sound wasn't needed anymore. The apartment from before was listed for rent again. I visited it once, standing across the street. The lights were on, and I saw someone standing in the kitchen. She was smiling. I left the city that night, driving until the roads emptied. The farther I went, the quieter everything felt. I stopped at a motel near dawn and checked in without speaking. The clerk stared at my mouth and quickly handed me the key. In the room, I finally allowed myself to look in the mirror. The smile was permanent now, stretched and calm. I tried to force it down with my hands, but it returned the moment I let go. I understood the truth clearly then, without fear. She never brought something into the apartment. She made space for it. The silence, the smiles, the watching were not symptoms, but steps. She wasn't taken or replaced. She finished becoming what was already there. The knife was never for harm. It was proof that the body didn't matter anymore. I stopped trying to fight it. The smell faded as I accepted it. That morning, I checked out of the motel without speaking. The clerk smiled back at me the same way. I know now that this is how it spreads, quietly, patiently. People think it's stress, exhaustion, withdrawal. They never notice the smile changing. I don't speak anymore because words slow it down. Smiling is faster. I sit in public places and let people see it. Some look away, some don't. One of them will follow me home eventually. When that happens, they'll start noticing doors open, lights left on, reflections lasting too long. And one night, they'll wake up and see me standing in their kitchen, holding nothing, smiling. And that will be the moment their story ends and mine continues.